Amen. All right. Shabbat Shalom. We are now in our Genesis study, and we've made it to Genesis 47. We're wounding towards the end, and as we always say, what a journey it is to see these things unfolding before our eyes. Last week we saw how Joseph gave instruction to his brothers and his father pertaining to where they should live, and they settled on the area of Goshen for many reasons, and we'll look into some of those today. But how the provision was made from Joseph knowing the outcome of the dream of Pharaoh, and how this sets up the children of Israel going forward. So let's keep those things in mind. Let's keep everything that's happened up thus far in mind, because that brings the full context of what we're reading today and studying today. So chapter 47, I'll start off reading. I'll read the first 12 verses, and then we'll kind of look at it and just see what Yah is showing us or saying to us. Genesis chapter 47, verse 1, it reads, "Then Joseph went and told Pharaoh and said, My father and my brothers, their flocks and their herds, and all that they possess have come from the land of Canaan. And indeed, they are in the land of Goshen. And he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to his brothers, What is your occupation? And they said to Pharaoh, Your servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. And they said to Pharaoh, We have come to dwell in the land because your servants have no pasture for their flocks. For the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now therefore, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. Then Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, saying, Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Have your father and brothers dwell in the best of the land. Let them dwell in the land of Goshen. And if you know any competent men among them, then make them chief herdsmen over my livestock. Then Joseph brought in his father, Jacob, and set him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Jacob, How old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to those days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. So Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out before Pharaoh. And Joseph situated his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Then Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with bread according to the number of their family. So last week we looked at the numbers of all the families and all that was traveling with Jacob to Goshen. And we remember Joseph, told his brothers what he was going to say to Pharaoh so they can have a carved out piece of land separate from the Egyptians, specifically because of their occupation and because of the way they were looked at and because of where Goshen sat by the Nile River. But I wanted to start pulling some things out that we see. I'll start off verse 2. It says, And he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. So one of the things I was looking at was 5 and how 5 throughout Scripture represents grace, specifically given by the Father. We look at Deuteronomy. I talked about it earlier. Deuteronomy being the 5th book of the Pentateuch. Number 5, Deuteronomy, and how the grace of Yah is presented before us following his instructions. Not following his instructions is the removal of that grace, right? So I looked at the number 5 in regards to that, specifically pulling out 5 of his brothers, But that's not what I looked at. I was looking at the whole idea and understanding that we all have that Joseph is a type of Messiah because he is the savior of his people, the savior of a nation based upon his actions. But his brothers, these are the same 5 brothers who sold him into slavery to begin with. But yet he presents them before Pharaoh, almost as to say, this is my family. These are my brothers, specifically these 5. And it reminded me of Jude 24, which reads, now unto him that is able to keep you from falling and present you faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy. So we see how Joseph presents his brothers before Pharaoh, and how Yahusha presents us faultless. Out of all the things we've done, he still presents us faultless. He stands his 5 brothers up, even with all the things that they have done to him specifically, but also to their father. He still stands them up and presents them to Pharaoh. So that was one of the things I was looking at. So I'll open it up to whatever you guys see. JP.
Well, I was just looking at, at the end of 46, it seemed like Joseph was saying in 46:34, at the end of the chapter, he says in 33, when Pharaoh shall call on you and shall say, what is your occupation? That in verse 34, he says, you shall say, thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth even till now, both we and also our fathers. And then at the end of that verse, he says that you may dwell in the land of Goshen. For every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. So I thought that was interesting that he says that every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. And then you get to where they're speaking to Pharaoh now, and in verse 3 of chapter 47, and then they say that. He says, what is your occupation? And they said unto Pharaoh, thy servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. So I was kind of confused a little bit, because I was thinking, well, were they supposed to not say that? They were supposed to say, it seemed like in verse 34 of chapter 46 that they were supposed to say, thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth. So it was just kind of interesting. I don't know. I was just thinking about that and seeing if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, remember, Joseph was planning this in chapter 46. He was planning what he would be, what he wanted, the area in which he wanted to place them in, for many reasons. One, to be outside of what was going on there. We talked about that last week. And 2, because of the way they were looked at by the Egyptians. If you remember, when we go back, there was a portion of scripture where it talked about how he separated his brothers where they sat from the Egyptians, because Egyptians refused to eat with the Hebrews because they were abominations. So they were a herding, a shepherd people. So here, a couple of things happened. One, I'm glad you brought that out, because I was going to say something about not what you brought out, but what you brought out led to what I was going to say. Because when he does present himself, when he does present his brothers, and Pharaoh asked them, he asked them what their occupation was. He then in turn says, if you have any competent men, in other words, competent in the same trade, then now take my herds and my flock and care for them as well. So this came in handy and of a service. And it goes back to what Yah told Abraham, your people will bless others. Your people will be a blessing to others, and great nations. So this ties into the promises that Yah gave to Abraham and his people. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I kind of was speaking in the realm of it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I was just kind of thinking though, like it felt like when I was reading it and when we ended 46, like they were like, if Joseph was like, don't tell him you're a shepherd because it's an abomination to these Egyptians to be a shepherd. Because that's what it said at the end of 34. You know, it says, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. So I was thinking, were they supposed to go in there and be like, we like trade cattle and we just, you know, that's like our occupation is, because he says, you know.
Nah, it's the
Because he does say in 46:34, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but it's the same thing. The livestock, caring for livestock is a shepherd.
Right. And so that's what I'm saying. Like it felt like he was.
All right. So the context is he's not taking them into Egypt. He wants to take them to Goshen.
Oh, okay. So he's like.
So he's gonna.
They don't want you in Egypt. They don't want you in Egypt. Oh,
right.
Okay.
He wants them to be in Goshen. So him saying this, Pharaoh will be like, okay, yeah, y'all stay in Goshen.
Yeah.
That's what's going on there. Yeah.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, like that. Thank you,
Sister Amy.
I don't know whether it helps, but the I was looking at this last week. I think I was asking the similar about that as well, the shepherd. And I looked and there's two words used, like the last bit where JP is referring to, where it says that the shepherd is an abomination. The word there is actually different to the word. Okay, so the word in that end bit of the 46 is hold on, sorry, is H6629. And it's the word, I can't even pronounce it, sonsa or something. And that means a collective name for a flock of one, of sheep or goats, and also figuratively of men. So it's to do with like a flock of something. I think that's what's detestable to them, a group of men. And what was interesting is looking at the word H6629. The letters used in it is Sad Aleph Vav Nun, Sad Aleph Nun, which is really powerful because it says that Sad means the way, or like Darak, or you know, like the way, the path. And then the Aleph is like the strong leader. So you got the way of the strong leader joined to continual life. And then it's got another picture of the way, and then another picture of a strong leader, and then again continual life. So I can kind of understand why the Egyptians hated a flock of men, especially Israelites, because they multiplied persistently and they just produced seed, and the Father Baruch them. Maybe that was one of the fears that they had. The other word used is in the other context is H7462, which is Resh Ayin Hey, and that means to pasture, to tend, to graze, or to feed, or to shepherd. So that means shepherd, as in a shepherd who shepherds the people. And the other one means, I think, more of a flock of men. So where it says it's an abomination to Egypt, I believe it's in context too, because it was a flock of men, Israelites.
Well, one of the things you have to not that you don't know, but understanding scripture is, I think that there's context to what you're saying in regards to the way the Egyptians feel about the Hebrews later as they multiply. But we always also have to keep things in context, because also there was already an established idea of what the Egyptians felt. In Genesis 43:26, it says, so 32, it says, so they set him in a place by himself and by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat food with the Hebrews, for it was an abomination to the Egyptians. And they had an issue with a lot of things. They had an issue with the way they dressed. They had an issue with their hairy bodies. They also had an issue that they took care of livestock. So that is the contemporary view that we have here when Joseph has them separating themselves by the occupation. Now, eventually, there is an understanding that the Egyptians fear the multiplying of the Hebrews because they would multiply and take over. And that's why they wanted to keep them in slavery, or that's why they put them in slavery to begin with. So we want to first make sure that we understand what's happening contemporarily at the time of the passage, and then understand how they eventually come. So in this particular passage, it's speaking of the fact that they detest these men for the way they look and for what they do as an occupation.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that they used that H6629 word, though, which referred to a collective flock instead of like a specific shepherd. So I was trying to understand why they used that one instead of the actual Hebrew word for shepherd. That was what I was trying to say.
Cool. JP?
I wanted to.
Jadiel saying something.
Oh, Jadiel, go ahead, Jadiel.
You
gotta raise your hand, man.
Can't hear you.
Sorry, can you guys hear me good?
Yeah.
All right, I'll be right. I'll be back after JP. Go ahead, JP.
All
right. You know what I'm saying? No, verse 6. You know, like you were saying, you made, and I like what you said, Rob, because it comes to fruition when verse 6 happens, and Pharaoh tells them to go and dwell in the land, you know, in Canaan, Goshen, and let them dwell. And he says, and then he tells them this, and Pharaoh says, and if thou knowest any men, he says, any men of activity among them, then make them rulers over my cattle.
Right.
So it was interesting because he just like, he says, okay, yeah, go to Goshen. And then he's like, and you're going to be like in charge now, like, in a sense, right?
Right.
So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then I'll make a comment after Jadiel about.
Yeah, because the very context of that is specific to what he needed them to do for him. You know what I mean? So the whole idea of the flock is prophetical because it comes later. So not disagreeing with it, but this particular passage is definitely dealing with the flock of herds. Go ahead, JP. Jadiel.
Yeah, Jadiel, my hand, I'll put it down. I'm going to put it back up right now. I'll do it done.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just wanted to confirm the livelihood of the Hebrews was that everything was used from the animals that they shepherded. The skins was used for clothing, tents, everything. You know, the Egyptians used different methods in dress. Like they usually wore linen a lot. You know, and they actually worshipped the cattle. They worship the cattle that they have. We have some civilization now because they think the animal specifically is sacred. Now you have this group of shepherds that shepherd cattle, and then they kill it also for their livelihood as well. And this is one of the reasons why they looked at it as an abomination, because it's like they're dressing themselves and they're making tents out of the animal that they worship. It was contrary to the lifestyle of the Egyptian. And that's one of the reasons why they looked at shepherds a specific way because of what they were doing. If you look at when Israel left Egypt, the first thing they did, as far as creating the gods of Egypt, was to build a golden calf. It was a golden calf that they built in memorial to the Egyptian gods that they had in Egypt. Molech is a bull-headed sun god. You see what I'm saying? Mithra is a man riding on a bull. It's like most these civilizations worshipped the animal or the creature rather than the creator. And when they look at the Israelites and they see them doing what's necessary to make clothing, doing what's necessary to make tents, doing what's necessary in food, eating the animals, and it didn't sit right with them, especially since Jacob offered sacrifices to Yah. So they also seen them offering sacrifices. Jacob was known, we could see earlier, Jacob already was offering sacrifices to Yah. So this wasn't the practice of Egyptians, so they was kind of contrary. That's one of the reasons why they thought of them as an abomination. Later on is exactly what you're saying. Later on, you see them recognizing their growth, now make to control them in that scenario, because it specifically said that
you're breaking up bad, brother.
I'm trying to come back.
Turn your
John,
turn your camera off and
was
see stuff better.
pointing out what it says further on, when the Egyptians which were swiftly approaching, take Israel into captivity because they were multiplying. So that all ties into what we were talking about. Jai is absolutely correct with all of those things. I found it interesting, though, that even with the way they viewed cattle and livestock, Pharaoh still had livestock. Egyptians still had livestock. Maybe they were taken care of by others, but remember, the people come later trying to, and we'll read later, trying to get food, and they run out of money and they sell their livestock. So now Egypt has even more livestock, so I found that interesting as well. Sister Diane. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, family. Once again, thoroughly enjoying today's lesson. Such a blessing and honor to be here. I want to thank Brother Jadiel on kind of helping to clarify this cow abomination. Both Egypt and Israel eat the cow, so why is it have been considered abomination in times past? And I think it's interesting, even what you said, Brother Rod, that like the Egyptians ate cows. I mean, they fed off of them. But then also, as Brother Jadiel was saying, Israel, that's different from the Egyptians, is that they use the entire animal. They use the skin. They probably use the bladder or whatever for their water bottle. They just use the whole animal. And maybe this is conjecture. Once again, this is the reason that the Egyptians considered it an abomination. It's almost like a dichotomy going on. On one hand is this, and on the other hand is that. And I think this is what happened to me last week by the statement I made that it was an abomination to the Egyptians to have those cows on their land, to have the cows up. Because I at some point thought that the cows even had freedom to walk around, in the area. And I could be wrong about that. Perhaps someone can correct me. But I just appreciated hearing that. That kind of cleared things up, and saying, well, yeah, on one hand it was this, but on the other hand, it was that. So, and Sister June, I just sent you an email. I just wanted to get that out there real quick through the newsletter or something. I don't know if I used the correct address. Amen.
Praise Yah, sis. All right. Good stuff, sis. And yeah, I remember your question last week, and you know, and it's funny you say dichotomy, because that's exactly what it is. It's like an understanding sandwich between, okay, but they have cattle too, you know, they have flocks too, which we see, because he now is asking for men of that trade to take care of his flocks, you know. So interesting the way they look at it and worship, because like Jadiel said, that's the first thing they did was get all the gold and make a calf, you know, from what they were used to seeing. Brother JP.
Just wanted to turn to the now that, you know, after that, in verse 7, it says, and Joseph brought in Jacob his father and set him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Right in verse 7, in the beginning of the conversation. And I was kind of looking at the word, you know, could mean to kneel. It could mean to give, you know, some type of, you know, respect, because he is a Pharaoh and they are in his land. So to cause to kneel, it could be used as, right? And then at the end, in verse 10, 47:10, it says, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh. So I was kind of looking at those words, and I was thinking if it could have been possible that he blessed them in a way of, but then I was thinking, well, but I don't know if he really, like, you know, Pharaoh believed in Yahuah to really, you know what I'm saying? So it's kind of interesting if that word is more like he kneeled down to him in the sense of he's the king, and you know, in that way, not to give him higher authority than Yahuah, but as in respect, because this is his land. So just wanted to bring that up, see if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's in direct correlation to the promises that Yah gave Abraham. Genesis chapter 12 says, starting in verse 1, I'll read the first couple verses. It says, now Yahuwah said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him that curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So I think we have here not only Joseph being a blessing to Pharaoh in what he was giving them and providing him, now Jacob blessing him as well. So not sure what it entailed, whether he kneeled down to him, I don't know, but definitely a direct correlation to the promises that Yah had given his father, his grandfather.
Yeah, I was thinking, well, maybe in the beginning he might have kneeled to him as a Pharaoh, you know what I'm saying? Just maybe that was something, and this is all speculation, but our assumption, you know, just like, well, maybe he could have, you know, because he was Pharaoh, and that might have been, you see that in movies and stuff, you know what I'm saying, with kings. But maybe at the end he did bless him, and as he left, like as in like you said, you know, it's like thanking or like giving that, you know, I don't know, it was just interesting. Because you can see those words, like they kind of like, they're not, you know, Hebrew is not really sometimes always specific, you know what I mean? Like in this sense, especially when you don't know the language, you know what I mean? You're kind of just trying to figure it out. And so
yeah, I agree.
I
agree. Yeah, we should definitely you know, based upon what I see, you know, I definitely think that cross references back to Genesis 12. But to your point, maybe we should look at the bless in verse 7 and bless in verse 10. Maybe we should look at those two. Well, why don't we do that before we move on?
Well, because it's the same word. It's the same word.
Okay.
They both use 1288, H1288. So that's why. But the word itself, right? The word itself can mean to kneel by implication, to bless God as an act of ordination or adoration, and vice versa, man as a benefit.
Right.
Also by
So
euphemism to curse.
So the purpose I had you read that was because I wanted you to see something here. So blessed means what we think it means, right? If you look at the situation that he's in, now this, I'm just going contextually with what I'm reading here. It would make sense that Pharaoh, knowing what Joseph means to him, would bless Jacob, right? That would be, he's coming into the land, boom, boom. Let me bless your father. You're such a blessing to me. Let me return the favor. But what happens? He's showing him who the father is. The father gives a blessing. The blessing comes through those who believe in him. I'm blessing you. Because there's a whole turnaround that's going on in the mind of Pharaoh. I'm pulling in these shepherds who I looked at as abomination. They're brother to my servant, my governor, my grand vizier. These are his people. I have to feel a certain way. Look at what this man has brought to me. I have to understand what's coming from who they're getting it from. And by Jacob blessing Pharaoh, he turns the tables on who the true father is, who the true king is. So I think we're seeing that in this passage as well, because if we look at it contextually, to me, it lines up that way. So
it also comes in and play with the left halves.
So here we go. Aleph Tav time.
So let's take a look here and see what it says to us. First of all, I like the idea that he's talking about him coming into the land. He's got all this cattle, and he has no pastures for them, and so they're praying that he'll let them dwell in the land of Goshen. So that's the first thing we see them, because he says, we pray you, or we beseech you, I guess, in that sense. But then as we see in verse 6 is where we see the first Aleph Tavs. It says that the land of Mitzrayim is before you. And in the best of the land, make Aleph Tav your father, and Aleph Tav your brethren to dwell. So we got that covenant that we see there, that he's given them the best land in Mitzrayim to dwell. And so therefore, when they go before this, he's telling them, if you know any men of activity among them, to make them rulers over my cattle. So now he's also given them authority over his own cattle, which must somehow dwell in this same area, maybe.
Right.
Then we go into 7, and it says, and Joseph brought in Aleph Tav, Jacob his father, and set him before Pharaoh. And then it gets interesting where it says, and then Jacob Baruch Aleph Tav Pharaoh. So we don't see the Aleph Tav until he blesses him, if you will. When he Baruchs him, that's when we see the Aleph Tav being placed in there. So now I think that it's coming into fullness of this prophecy that was given to Joseph about what was going to come. And I believe that blessing is what Jacob recognized, that this is part of Yahuwah's grand plan for my family, and he spared us, he saved us. Therefore, he is bowing down or kneeling in respect to him. But I also believe that there's a baraka that's been placed upon Pharaoh because of what's being going on here. We see the Aleph Tavs in play here. Right. So, I see that, once again, they come in and they bring us a little bit more clarity and depth, how it lines up with that. So.
Absolutely. Praise God. I mean, and it directly, what you just spoke on directly is the understanding of chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. You know what I mean? His adherence to understand that I trust, I bless this man and his family, I will then be blessed by the Father that blesses them. Period. Aleph Tav. Praise Yah. So let's go from Aleph Tav to olive oil. Go ahead, sister. You got your hand up.
No, I was just going to say the same thing as what you say, Rod. What I was seeing in it is, because you read before, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Those I shall baruch those who baruch you, and I shall curse those who curse you. And in this context, Pharaoh's being blessed, but obviously Pharaoh's also blessing Joseph by having him in his household as well as his family. And obviously then you have the Aleph Tav, which for me, the Aleph Tav, whenever I see it, is the Father's hand signature, because he's the sovereign over all things, no matter what. And he writes his signature, like back in them days, the kings had to write a signature, like Queen Esther, or anyone who went before the king, they had to have his stamp. And that to me is because we are before the sovereign of all sovereigns and the creator. So his signature is the Aleph Tav. And it's amazing how it's there with the blessing. So it's almost as though the Father's showing in his word that it's him giving the blessing on both ends. So he's controlling the whole system, even though Pharaoh thinks he's in charge.
Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
Yeah, he's definitely not in charge. So
praise God. Praise God. I saw something else that I wanted to, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to ask everyone what you think is being said here. So, verse 7 at the end, after he comes before him, he says, Pharaoh says to Jacob, "How old are you?" Verse 9, and Jacob says to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage." So what do you guys see in those two verses? What is he saying? Anyone? Oh,
He's
Mecca.
still a young Peppy.
Huh?
He's still a young puppy compared to his forefathers. His pilgrimage hasn't been as long,
Yeah.
or as evil. He hasn't had the troubles that his forefathers had. In 130 years, where they lived, 900, 600? I mean, they were living a lot of years back in those before him. So, even though 130 years seems old to us, it's still kind of young in the youth of that day, according to the Hebrews span of life in the beginning.
Yeah.
Even though we know it starts tapering off after Noah's time, but I don't think we've seen it completely exhausted yet.
Oh yeah, no, not yet. Yeah, because he lives to 147, right? So Mecca, what do you see? Or what was your question? Something else?
I was asked. So you definitely agree with Rick. First, the days not being as long as his fathers who lived 900, 800, 700 years old. But then also, as far as his days being evil, you look at everything that he went through growing up. I mean, at least not well, yeah, growing up. Even to with his children, serving Laban and everything he had to do to get to get what he has today. It's not like it just came through this easy road that was, just straightforward. But there were a lot of troubles, and he was dealt this, he dealt with deceit, not only from that point, but even all the way up into the point where his children have, sold their brother into slavery, sold the son of his beloved wife into slavery, sold him away and came back with a false report of him being murdered, or so all those things are just like, he's looking at, he's taking that and reflecting like pretty much like, you don't even know, Pharaoh, what I had to do to get here. You don't even know what I had to do to get here. The day I suffered were evil, and his arms long as my arm. So just adding the two, not only are his years shortened, to the length of his father's, and everything he had to do within those set amount of years, was like, just, it was traumatic, You know, it was evil. He faced a lot of wickedness going through, you know, just to get to this point he's at now.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit it right on the head. I think he's specifically speaking of Abraham and Isaac here, because we know from Genesis chapter 25 verse 7, Abraham was 180. I'm sorry, Abraham was 175 when he passed, and Isaac in Genesis 35:28 was 147, was 180. So Abraham lived to 175, Isaac lives to 180. So his days are shorter. But like Emeka said, you know, absolutely, looking at his life, looking at what he went through with his brother, looking at what he went through when all those years where he thought his son was dead, you know what I mean? And now to find him alive and all of the things that came in between. He's expressing all of what you see, you know, shows my age. All of what you see shows the journey. So that he didn't just simply say, I'm 130. He tells them what's happened in that time so that he gets a full picture of what you see when you look at me, you know? And I think that was vital, because even though Pharaoh's the king, Pharaoh is learning something from what he's witnessing before his eyes right now, you know, from all fronts. So good point, Emeka. Very good answer. And it echoed mine. Brother Brian, what you see?
I was just reminded of the verse in Job. It says in Job 14, verse 1 says, "Man that is born of a woman is a few days and full of trouble." I think Job. I think that's Job speaking in that. I'm not really. I have to
Yeah,
verify.
Job 14:1. Yep.
Yeah. So he's like, I think he's Jacob or Yaakov is coming to the same conclusion in that respect.
Yes, absolutely. Very good. Very good. I actually have that here. I didn't say that, but you beat me to it, brother. I like to hear what other people have to say always. Anyone else on those passages? If not, we can move on to the next set of verses. The next person can read from verse 13 to verse 35. I'm sorry, verse 13 to verse, we can split that in half. Go from 13 to 20. 13, stop at verse 20. Who wants to read? JP.
Okay, 13 to 20. It says, "And there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very sore, so that the land of Egypt and all the land of Canaan fainted by reason of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the corn which they bought. And Joseph brought the money unto Pharaoh's house. And when money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came unto Joseph and said, Give us bread, for why should we die in thy presence? For the money faileth. And Joseph said, Give your cattle, and I will give you for your cattle if money fail. And they brought their cattle unto Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for horses, and for the flocks, and for the cattle of the herds, and for the donkeys, and he fed them with bread for all their cattle for that year. When that year was ended, they came unto him the second year, and said unto him, We will not hide it from my sovereign, how that our money is spent. My sovereign also hath our herds of cattle. There is not aught left in the sight of my sovereign but our bodies and our lands. Wherefore shall we die before thine eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants unto Pharaoh, and give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land be not desolate. And Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians sold every man his field because the famine prevailed over them. So the land became Pharaoh's.
Wow.
Wow. I said the same thing.
Yeah. What you say, brother?
But that's just deep, you know. Just in a picture, you know, it just shows like, you know, the length, I guess, in the sense of what people will go to, you know, when it comes to food. You know, when it came to food, it was like they came and sold all their cattle. They say they sold all their possession and then even got to a point when they sold themselves. And so I don't know, it kind of reminds me of some end times type of thinking, you know, too. So, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, nah, I mean, there's truth to that. You know, I don't know why, but June and I I think me more so than her. I usually drag her in, but I like those end time type shows or movies because there's element of scripture there because they mimic it, you know, and the things that they say, the things that they write, the things that they're doing. But then there's that dark side, that element of evil that exists, and it's, you know, you got to be careful of some of those things. But I think what we see here, you know, is Joseph's ability to what's the word? Not officiate, but to administrate. Like he is seeing things from a lens that no one else sees it. He knows the dream. He knows the length of the famine. He knows how much it's going to take to feed all of the people. But at the same time, he's also setting it up so that Egypt is in control of everything, the financial, the land, and the people. They come to a great power. Now, some of it gets distorted because then they start abusing the Hebrews, obviously. They start abusing even some of their own people. But he is setting them up to be financially solitude, you know, for them to be in a position of complete power. So it's amazing how Yah uses Joseph to put not only Egypt in the place that they are in, but ultimately the children of Israel in the place that they'll ultimately be as Pharaoh dies, and then what happens after. So this is amazing portion of scripture here, but there's a lot more here. So I'm opening it up to, okay, Ja and then JP.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I like the point that JP with that they're selling their cattle and their land just so they can be provided with bread, with grain. You know, it's not like they were like, let me just slaughter these cows and eat the meat all day. It was like our culture is horrible. You know, like people now just eat burgers all day, chicken nuggets all day. But these people saw the difference in how to eat. They were like, we need to live off of this, live more off of grain rather than meat. So I'd rather sell my cattle to get months worth of grain than eat meat at this moment, you know. And I wanted to point that out as well with the Israelites going through the wilderness, eating bread, and then they're going asking for meat. It's like they're doing the opposite. So it's interesting how when Yah brings us to a famine, it brings us to the point where we're considering what's the most important thing for us, what's the best thing for us, and it brings us to the idea that the trials bring us to a clearer, stronger understanding of what we need as people, and it just shows how people recognizing that coming to Egypt. And I like that. I like that you brought out that Egypt was expanding, actually being blessed. And it was because you see how Pharaoh responded to Joseph and Jacob, and how Pharaoh blessed Jacob, and now Pharaoh is being blessed. You know, and it's a part of the Abrahamic covenant that you mentioned earlier. I will bless those that bless you, and I will curse those that curse you. Later on, when Egypt curses them, we see the opposite now. They're not being blessed by you. Matter of fact, Egypt shrinks into like a little portion of location later on in history, rather than becoming big empire that they once was. You know, so we see that that is very true. Even the people in the world were blessed when they blessed Yah's people. And they were also cursed. So this is very true, and we should also remember that or apply it to ourselves. Like, it still happens today. When people curse us or his righteous people, they will be affected by that cursing. And when people bless us, they will be affected by that blessing as well.
Yeah, you know, definitely. You raised some very, very interesting points that we should look into. Not necessarily scriptural, but just the whole idea of what you said about people running around eating burgers every day. And it's like, you know, that whole idea of that being the most affordable thing is junk, you know, and that you know, a kid that has an allowance can go to McDonald's and get a full meal. You know what I mean? And that becomes a pattern of the way he eats, and then everybody eats like that. I was watching a documentary of this weightlifter, and he said he used to eat 5 Big Macs for every meal for 10 years to bulk his body up, and then he had triple bypass surgery because his heart, you know, couldn't take any more of that horse meat. You know what I mean? So it's just like that's a whole nother area that we have to look at, and as far as taking care of ourselves and what's available to the poorest in the land. You know what I mean? So that's something we got to be mindful of. But scripturally, everything you said was on point, because there is a method to what Joseph is doing, and there is a blessing because Pharaoh's letting him do it. You know what I mean? And what Egypt becomes because of it, and the power. And then they turned away from, you know, being the you know, getting advice from Yah's people to the next Pharaoh worshiping other gods completely and not even taking the advice, forgetting Joseph and his family. So absolutely. Thank you, brother. JP, and then Amy.
Yeah, I was I like what it was being said. It was funny. But like also from a practical like now standpoint, I'm seeing that, you know, to be prepared, you know, because the money here failed. You know, the money failed, and so it's interesting because I know a lot of that
Rice and beans, brother. Rice and beans.
Rice and beans. You know what I'm saying? So like they were like, hey, we're gonna sell ourselves. It said that they were gonna sell themselves after a while just for like seeds, and to it says here in verse 19, wherefore shall we die before thine eyes? And he says, buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants unto Pharaoh, and give us seed. Like, so it's like they were just like, give us some seeds so we can grow our own plants and so we can live. So it just kind of took me to a practical standpoint of just saying, hey, you know, of course, learning how to grow your own crops and for what can sustain your household, of course, because not everybody has 30,000 acres or 20 acres even. But just from that standpoint, I thought, you know, that's pretty interesting, because we see in kingdoms and throughout history, the systems fail, you know, and what happens is that the people lean towards the government, which is what we're seeing here, that the people are leaning towards the government, like, assist us, you know, help us, you know what I mean? So
But listen, but a government that is governed by Yah is always going to help the people.
right.
A government that is not is always going to distort and use and take advantage of the people. You know what I mean? So there is a difference.
Definitely,
And I think
definitely.
yeah. So there's truth to what you're saying, and I like what you're saying about understanding and being self-sufficient, being able to have your own, but also understanding and realizing you also got to protect your own, because the people that don't have, they're gonna come get it from the people that do. So there's that part too. You know what I mean? So that's without Yah's protection, we have none. Right? Amen, brother. That's some reality though, man. We're faced at a time where, the ground is shaking right now. You got this coronavirus going on, California out there where you are, I'm sure it's in other places. I don't know what it is. I don't know what's going on. You know what I mean? There are definitely things happening within the health industry. There's falsities being put out there, false information. So we have to keep everything in perspective when we hear these things, not to panic. But like you said, always be prepared, because he calls us to get prepared. I think you and June thinks like you as well all the time, always on the mindset of survival and being ready. And I think her and Letty talk about it too sometimes. But it's just really something that we ought to be prepared for. We're not supposed to get surprised. We're not supposed to be sitting there with no oil in our lamps, because we know what we're supposed to be doing. So praise Yah, we need to keep that in mind as well. What do we got? Sister Amy.
Gosh, I thought I forgot what I was going to say then. I was just going to ask, and Yadiel was saying before about they gave their cattle for the wheat, was it? For wheat?
Well, grain, it says grain.
For grain, I think that's interesting as well, because wouldn't the grain last longer as well than cattle as well? Like, if depending on how long the famine was, wouldn't it be more as well? Wouldn't it be more like you'd have more?
Well, if you remember, Joseph set aside the grain, knowing what Pharaoh's dream was.
Yeah.
Remember, all of this takes place after the interpretation of the dream. So Joseph started setting up stuff so that he will be ready for the famine. And he looked at it from every angle. That's what I was talking about, his administration and setting up the government of Egypt and how they would handle their economy, so to speak. Because he's not just being a governor and an advisor, he's being an accountant and a money marketer and a planner and an advertiser. He's doing all of these things that show successful businessmen how to operate, how to show successful families how to take care of their sustenance for their family as provided by Yah. So this is not just somebody doing something. This is someone that has directions to the letter of how to last and live through this famine that was to come. So
yeah, it's interesting because in 2015, for me, the Father told me to leave where I was from, and that's why I live where I am now. And I've been kind of storing up food when I can here as well, which is, I don't know why, I just felt like I was meant to. I kept hearing the name Joseph and 7 years of plenty, 7 years of, what that, it's a bit hard when you're on your own to get the full definition of, the full understanding of whether this is a spiritual famine coming, or is it a physical famine, or is it both? So I have flour upstairs, I have quinoa here, I have rice, I have beans, I have seeds, peanuts.
This isn't a spiritual famine. This is a physical famine.
Yeah, the one we're reading now is physical, but I mean, is it going to come to pass again in our lifetime? That's what I'm saying. Is it going to happen again?
Not as long as we're here. We keep the light burning. We are the lights. We are the city shining on the hill. We give guidance to the Father, right? We talked about in when Yahusha was speaking to his disciples about a city on a hill. There was literally a city on a hill that the fishermen used to look to so they could make their way back to the city. You know, he was giving those nautical men something they can relate to. You are that city for the people that don't know me. So we're the lights. You know, so if there's a spiritual famine, we have to be that light. Always.
Do you think there'll be a physical famine again in the way of this, like in regards to like when the scriptures say, you know, we won't be able to buy, those who won't be able to buy and sell, you know, they won't be able to buy and sell unless they got the mark of the beast. So we're going to come into time, if we've got the Aleph Tav mark, so to speak, example, would we be reserved for that? You know what I mean? Would we have food? Or you get where I'm going with it? So I was just kind of asking that as well. I'm
gonna let Ja answer that. He's
Go on, Ja.
So Matthew chapter 24 clearly tells us that there's going to be physical famine, physical pestilence, physical earthquakes. There's going to be physical things, as well as prophecies telling us that there's going to be spiritual famines as well. But he's not saying that there's going to be spiritual famines for his people. Just like, you know, his people have the word written in them. They are the ones gathering this now in their being, so they can actually deliver it to those who are seeking. So the spiritual famine doesn't exist for those who are doing what Joseph is doing, gathering as much truth and changing their lives to walk after his ways and his, you know, they will not experience a spiritual famine. Will experience a spiritual famine, and God will use his people to fight for in a dark place. But as far as physical famines, Matthew 24, the Messiah declares that there will be famines. In Matthew 24, verse 7, there will be famines and pestilence. There will be physical famines again. You know, and a lot of times, just like the Israelites, he brings them to a place of hunger, or he brings them to a place of hurt in order to build them up, in order to allow them to recognize what they need. So there will be troubles in order for people to recognize that they need to repent back to Yah for protection, for guidance. But who's going to tell those people that? Those his people who are not in the drought. We will not be, just like how Goshen, when those plagues was falling, their crops were being destroyed, and those cats was dying, and all those, the water was turning to blood, and it was dark. Goshen was the only place that it was not being affected. You know, so likewise, the spiritual famine is not for his upright ones, for those who repent.
Oh, the signal. Yeah, that's what
man.
I did hear most of it.
A lot of what you said was cut off, brother, and you said some good things. I think the most important thing was, you know, that there is evidence of physical famine. There is evidence that we can clearly see prophetically coming, and also, you know, like we were saying earlier, for Yah's people, there's no spiritual famine. You know, it's we have to be the light and bring them to the Father, like we spoke earlier. So that, I think, but just there were some other things that you said that were kind of choppy.
I think I heard what he said, because I believe it's given me more clarity on that. Abba has been speaking to me, because he told me to come away from where I was to gather food, to take Reuben, to study the Aleph Tav, to study his word, to go back to his Asian language, to go back to his Torah. And there was one time when I heard him speak, bring food into my storehouse, and I was like, wow, what does this mean? And I know now it means like kind of knowledge of him within me, and also obviously the external of Matthew 24 with the famines and the food and the pestilences and the diseases. I believe what we're coming to now, you know, coronavirus, 5G, all this nonsense that's going on is going to hit the earth. And obviously those in the covenant with the seal, sealed by Yahuah, are going to be obviously not pulled into that. They're going to be protected. That's what I'm kind of saying. Because I literally live way out in an island in the middle of the North Sea, and left all my family. I don't know a single soul here. And this is where he brought me, and I was like, okay, with a suitcase in 2015 and my son, and I've been here nearly 5 years now and still haven't moved. So
Praise
thanks,
Yah.
Jadiel. Thanks, Ron.
Brother Evan. Is that Evan? I don't know. Is that a brother or sister? I'm not sure.
Hey, brother. No, that's my son's name. Is me, brother Wences.
Oh, hey, Wences, man. You talking about a blast from the past. Welcome, brother.
Hey,
Welcome.
everyone, be blessed. Shalom, Shabbat. Yeah, definitely. Just three points. Definitely confirmation in regards to how Yah is gonna bless us and protect us, how His care is over His people, and this is an excellent type of an anti-type that we're gonna be experiencing. So it's good that we're getting in depth because we need to be prepared. But the beautiful thing about Yah is that He has our back. You know, and what's interesting is in verse 12 of Genesis, it says, and Joseph nourished his father and his brethren and all his father's household with bread according to their families. So when we're the family of Yah, we belong to him, you know, and Messiah he has our back. He's gonna take care of us. He's gonna be providing what we need. So there's not gonna be any need to worry. Now, what's interesting is that the surrounding Gentiles that were coming, they were the ones that needed to do what? Needed to provide, give money. They were the ones that needed to give of the meat and their cattle. They're the ones that needed to put themselves into slavery, give over their lands. But for God's people, when they obeyed, they what? They were already receiving the bread, the manna from heaven. There's nothing else we need. But then the others come to us. Now, what's interesting is all of us are on a different walk, different paths, and we're all growing. And some of us, although we may be professing to serve Yah, we may be at different spiritual levels. And some of us may have to be like the Gentiles and have to realize, wait a minute, what is more important, life or mammon or money? So what do? We got to disregard that money. We got to look for the bread. Then maybe, guess what? Some of us are even deeper, and some of us don't even know that wait a minute, where else am I failing? All right, I got to sacrifice my works because all this is attained by what? By self-righteousness, right? I attain money, what? A lot of people love money. A lot of people have a lot of cattle. A lot of people have a lot of land. So practically, it speaks to me where I have to take inventory of my life and look, Lord, what am I sacrificing that I'm not choosing life that I may receive the true bread? I need to live. So that was one point. Point two, definitely God is going to bless us with health. What's very interesting is that when Joseph takes his father before Pharaoh, he says, Pharaoh looks at him and he goes, man, how old are you? I don't know if you guys touched that point.
Yeah, we kind of did a little bit.
But what's interesting,
feel free, yeah, share.
But what's interesting about that point is there's obviously something that he recognized in Jacob above the Egyptians. In Exodus, Yah told the people, and he said, listen, I'm not going to strike you with the diseases that I have stricken the Egyptians with, right? If you obey my law and my commandments, correct? So there's obviously something that Jacob was living a certain lifestyle, was living an older lifestyle compared to the other Egyptians, and he wanted to know what it was. Later on, we see that Joseph dies similar age of his father. So God is going to protect his people. Yah has our back. Physically, if we stay within his will and his law, health will come for that. We need health if we're going to be preaching the word of God, you know? We need it.
Absolutely.
Now, another point is here, we see a duality in this story. We see that in one aspect, Egypt represents, because the word Pharaoh means great house. So we see that it means that there's a great house. So the typology is a father and son in his people, helping others. But the second typology is we see a future typology, because eventually Ezekiel 29:3 says, "Speak and say, thus saith the Lord God, I am against thee, Pharaoh king of Egypt, the great dragon that lieth in the midst of his rivers, which hath said, my river is mine own, I have made it myself." So right there, the interesting thing is that the place of safety eventually becomes what? A place of bondage. So eventually the mindset, Pharaoh, the mindset with another Pharaoh. So now we see the duality between God, God's house. We're not servants, right? We're freed. But now we see a new mentality coming into this land that is the what? The spirit of the dragon. And and with this, I'll finish. It kind of reminded me of Revelation 12:13-16. And it says, "And when the dragon saw that he was cast onto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time from the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out his mouth, water as a flood, after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth, and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ." That's a lot, but basically what I want to tie that into is that right now we live in America. America was supposedly established based on what? Christianity, Christian principles. So for us, it has been a place of safety, as Egypt was a place of safety for Israel. So here in America, we've been given the opportunity as Christians to grow, to flourish. But guess what? The time comes when all of a sudden America or Egypt becomes the beast.
Hey, Marcus.
Yeah, brother?
Hey, brother. Let's focus on the first 2 points so we won't deviate from so much from the chapter. But good points. But there's other hands. You know what I mean? But yeah, if you want to elaborate on the first point with the famine and things like that.
Okay. Well, so I just want, thank you, brother. I just want to tie the fact that right now, the typology that we're living now is exactly what they were experiencing. So when America is given or makes the image to the beast, we have to be ready and know that Yah is going to be with us. Yah is going to nourish us, and we just have to be ready. Be blessed.
Absolutely. You kind of nailed it. You know. Nah, there's nothing else to really say. Provide for us, just like he did in typology. I like that you mentioned typology, so we can all make sure that we're applying the things we're reading to Messiah and how he's going to treat us. And I didn't even recognize the fact that he said, "How old are you?" I always thought that question was a little bit funny, like, why are you asking how old? But it's nice to see a little more clarity that he probably was like Caleb, 80 years old and running with the soldiers, So, that's what y'all wants to give to us. Praise y'all for your comments. Good to see you.
Yeah, I like what he said, concerning how the brothers will be taken care of, how the fathers will be taken care of. In verse 12, he says, "Then Joseph provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with bread according to the number of their families." So they did not have to be worried about the famine, and us the same way. As we look to Yahusha, we will not have to be worried about the famine, following his law, statutes, and commandments. So good stuff, brother. June, and then Amy.
Did we get to verse 19?
Yeah, we stopped in verse 20.
Okay. I was just looking at that verse. Well, I had a question. Jadiel was breaking up somewhat. I was hearing him say that the land of Goshen wasn't affected by the famine, like the land itself. And it, and then I don't think I was able to hear beyond that. But that gave me a little more insight into this verse because their land wasn't affected, they were able to, a year later come back and negotiate, use it as negotiation. And it looks like they're negotiating their own selves. Like they're saying, buy us and our land for bread, and let us and our land be servants of Pharaoh. And then he says, and give us seed, which I'm assuming, even if, the Pharaoh is going to buy that land, they're able to plant the seed and grow food. He says, and let us live and not die, and let the land not lie waste, because it gives the impression like their land was cool, but nothing was really growing on it, or nothing was really going on with their land. And so maybe that was just all part of the setup for their physical salvation, if you will, to survive.
Yeah, so the land of Goshen was definitely fertile land, and it ran right by the Nile, so it was very nourished, geologically, physically. But when they talk about selling themselves, they're talking about being servants for food, and because they had exhausted their money, they had exhausted their cattle. Next was their land and themselves. So that's kind of what it's like a downward spiral into where they were and what they were willing to do to get what they needed to live. So, Ja.
Yeah, and looking at sorry, the wind is blowing. Looking at the verses, verse 15 talks about the money failed all over in Egypt and in Canaan. But it was the Egyptians that came to Joseph to sell their land. It wasn't Jacob's sons that came to Joseph to sell the land. I believe so. It says on verse 15, it says, all the Egyptians came unto Joseph and said, give us bread, but why shall we die in your presence, because money fails? And Joseph said, give your cattle, and I will give you for your cattle if money fail. And they brought their cattle unto Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for horses, flocks, cattle, herds, asses, and fed them with bread for all their cattle for that year. And when the year has ended, they came unto him the second year. So talking about the Egyptians specifically, not necessarily.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Sister Amy.
Hey, I just wanted to reiterate, like, last week when we did the study, just looking back at my notes, remember, like, we looked up the word Goshen and it meant drawing near. And then we looked into the pictograph, and Sister Linda, I think, defined that it meant the word Goshen. Sorry, I'll just give the Hebrew Strongs again, is 1657. It's the Gamel Shin Nun. This is really powerful because it means to walk to eat, or walk to press, continual seed. I think that's quite interesting because obviously people were seeking those in Goshen to give them seed so they could eat. And it's actually, the word Goshen is referring to walking to eat, continual seed. So I think that's quite interesting. The other thing I wanted to, what come to mind when we were talking before about the famine thing again, I was just seeing if there was any recognition or what anyone thinks maybe in regards to Amos 8:11 again. And it speaks in Amos 8:11, behold, the days come, saith Yahuah, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of Yahuah. And then verse 12 says, and they shall wander from sea to sea, and from north even to east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word. I think that's really interesting, to seek the word of Yahuah, and shall not find it. And then it says, in that day shall the fair virgins and young men faint for thirst. They shall swear by the sin of Samaria, and say, thy God, it says in this translation, Dan liveth, and the manner of Beersheba liveth, even they shall fall and never to rise again. I was just trying to see, you know, because that speaks of like a famine of the word of Yah, and I was trying to see if that, because has that happened, you know, or are we waiting for that to happen? Because that's not a food, that's a spiritual, I believe, a spiritual famine of the actual words of the Father. I personally believe we've already been in it and we're coming out of it, and those who are receiving now the Aleph Tav, going back to his ancient language, is actually the bread, you know, the food, his word. But not everybody's going to get that, because not everybody's going to listen, and not everybody's going to be returning to the Torah to be marked, to actually have the mind to receive the ancient pacts.
Right. So, well, when you brought that up last week, we kind of redirected back to this passage, because that was prophetically, you're speaking prophetically. This is speaking of something that's going on here in Genesis. So I think we would say the same thing today. Like, let's stick with what we're reading here rather than Amos, of what's to come prophetically. It's not talking about the past, right? Remember our discussion last week?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just reading line upon line, precept upon precept. It comes in with the end times. Sorry.
Most of the time, there's an initial understanding of what's going on in the accounts that we see in the Torah and the prophets. Then there's an application. There's a clear-cut application. It's not just based off of just connecting the same words together. Like, if it says famine here, it says famine there, it says this here, it says that. There's more to do with the reapplication of context rather than just a reapplication of words. You know, so the famine that it's in Amos is definitely an end-time famine. You know, so there is a correlation with the end times, and this situation with Joseph. Anything dealing with Egypt is absolutely an end time correlation with the context. You have the people of God dealing with Egypt dealing with the people of God. And when you look in Revelation, you do have the end time power referred to as Egypt. So, and they're dealing with the people of God as well. So there is a correlation, but we have to be careful not to create connections based off just similar word usages. But when we're looking at we're trying to dissect the initial primarily, and then go into the application if there's a clear-cut reapplication that we can.
So, well, we left off in verse 20. So I'll just read from verse, unless somebody else wants to read, I'll read from verse 20 to the end of the chapter, and then we'll discuss it. And we'll work on everything else in between.
Are we going to do a part 2, or are we trying to finish The
No, we'll finish this chapter. Go ahead, Wes. You wanted to read?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Awesome. So you guys already read 20. I'm reading 21 and on, right?
You can read 20 again. That's fine.
Okay. And Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians sold every man his field, because a famine prevailed over them. So the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he removed them to cities from one end of the borders of Egypt to even the other end. Only the land of the priests bought he not, for the priests had a portion assigned them of Pharaoh, and did eat their portion which Pharaoh gave them. Wherefore they sold not their lands. Then Joseph said unto the people, Behold, I have bought you this day, and your land for Pharaoh. Lo, here is seed for you, and ye shall sow the land. And it shall come to pass in the increase that ye shall give the fifth part unto Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be your own for seed of the field, and for your food, and for them of your households, and for the food of your little ones. And they said, Thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in thy sight of my master, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. And Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt unto this day that Pharaoh should have the 5th part, except the land of the priests only, which became not Pharaoh's. And Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen. And Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions therein, and grew and multiplied exceedingly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 70 years. So the whole age of Jacob was 147 years old. And the time drew near that Israel must die. And he called his son Joseph, and said unto him, If now I found grace in your sight, put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh, and deal kindly and truly with me. Bury me not, I pray thee, in Egypt, but I will lie with my fathers, and thou shalt carry me out of Egypt, and bury me in the burying place. And he said, I will do as thou hast asked. And he said, Swear unto me. And he sware unto him. And Israel bowed himself upon his bed's head.
What you see there, brother?
Okay, to keep it short, actually, I have a question for whoever can answer. Is one of the things I saw was interesting was the fact that I know we see it later on during the time of Israelites at Mount Sinai, and they were setting the portion of the priests and stuff. I thought it was interesting how Pharaoh, kind of had the same system where he gave the priests their own portion separate from the people. Because of the duty that they had. I thought that was a pretty good thing. I guess my question here is like, why would he do that? And I don't know. To myself, I can probably say, maybe Joseph had a hand in that, since he was his advisor, second, right-hand man type thing. And also, I just wanted to bring up the fact in verse 27 where it says, And Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they possessed therein, and the possessions therein, and grew and multiplied exceedingly. I thought it complemented very well what Jadiel said previously, that these were the Egyptians that was just, giving these things away. But then you have, the Israelites not doing that. They were being taken care of, and Yahweh was blessing them through the Egyptians. But yeah.
Yeah, I like what you said about that. Definitely ties into what Jah was saying earlier, and what we were talking about, how Egypt was built up, and how the Israelites were taken care of by Joseph. But also, too, you mentioned the priests. I don't know if I have an answer to that question, but I also wanted to add in that Joseph's father-in-law was a priest. So that could have went into the protection of their land as well. But there was something sacred about them that Pharaoh didn't want touched. I don't know if that adds to it or not. Anyone got anything to add on that?
Yeah. It was, in looking at the pagan, it was always been position.
Yeah, Jadiel.
Try to turn off your video, Joey. You might come in better.
Yeah, turn off your video. I'm trying to tell you.
That was code talk.
What about now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me better?
Oh,
Yeah.
All right. Maybe it's my face. Some things up. All right. So, what I know according to scripture about the pagan perspective is that everything that they had as far as their belief system was they were very superstitious of as well. You know, everything that they held sacred was they had superstitions about. So I believe that this was, of course, I believe this is the priests, the Pharaoh's priests that served the false gods of the Pharaoh, you know, or of Egypt. So I believe that this is just simply referring to the superstition that they had of their belief system, not necessarily any. But I do see the interesting aspect about how they had their own land. It said here that they had their own land, but the Levites didn't have their own land per se. They had to receive a portion or share their land with the other tribes of Israel. So I think that will be like a little difference that these priests possession of land rather than the Levites only a portion of land. That's what you was referring to.
Good. I also found it interesting of the giving aspect. It says here they gave 20%. They gave 1/5 to Pharaoh, you know, and and gladly they were thankful for what they had, so they gave 1/5 to Pharaoh. What else is there? JP, the vow. Remember the vow under the thigh? We talked about that back in when Abraham and who was it? Eliezer. Yeah.
I was just about to bring up that point too. That always interests me about how they made agreements with Yah and how it was carried out by Yah himself. Like he carried out the blessings that they've done. Abraham with Eliezer promising, making a covenant. Even Isaac with Jacob, and now we see Jacob. Is it Jacob? Yeah. So I always wondered what's the significance in the thigh. And I think it was with Abraham, it was a specific thigh. It was the right thigh or something like that.
Yeah, we looked at that back there. I think it was me and JP. Was it? Am I right, JP? We were looking at that, and I think that when they talked, it was actually the groin, the crotch. So
yeah, I wasn't really.
We may have to look at this again.
Yeah.
We may have to look at this again.
Right. Yeah. So it was like, you know, I mean, we're making an oath, and you're grabbing the thigh, the groin. You know what I mean? Like, you know, that's serious business. If we don't keep this, you know, is something lost here? You know, I'm just saying.
Well, wasn't that was because that was a sign of the covenant, the circumcision. I think that has to do with the circumcision being the sign of the covenant that was made with Yah. That
as
was
a remembrance. As a remembrance.
Yeah, so
they're grabbing the crotch, grabbing the areas. Yeah. This is where you made the covenant with Yah. We're making it on the same covenant. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna double check.
So remember
but,
remember the covenant you made with Yah. If you don't keep it, we're gonna keep cutting. I don't know. Maybe we should have saved that for the men's ministry, but praise Yah. No, I think we should definitely look to see more clearly what that means, grabbing under the thigh. Somebody may have an answer. I see JP, then Diane, then Evan.
No, well, I want to just talk about, I seen like how they, the whole situation of them giving themselves up and then selling all their cattle and then they bought seed or they sold themselves for seed. And it's just interesting that Joseph, he it looks like he created this law that they would give up the fifth, in verse 23, he says, well, in 24, I'm sorry, in verse 24, it says, and shall come to pass that you shall give the fifth part unto Pharaoh. And they were definitely glad to do so because of the, 25, it says, thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in thy sight. So it's pretty interesting, that they did that after, and they were willing to, so it's like they came into that. It's almost like tithing in a way, after a while, like it becomes like, even though I don't know if it's a law or not to tithe, as much as Joseph had made this for them, and almost to like stay in, almost like a business aspect for them, like to keep in that connection with the people, like, so then they were getting it was always circulating, whatever was grown, 20% is coming their way, and it's always going to circulate so that the Pharaoh's house or the government system would always have something coming in, you know what I mean, for the rest of the of the days. So it's pretty interesting,
Yeah, it was definitely a system of taxation set up, and it became a custom in verse 26 that 1/5 will be given. But the point I think that we missed. Well, no, we didn't miss it because you said it. Was the gratitude in which, because Joseph had saved their lives. You remember, we talked about type of Yahusha. He saved our lives. We're willing to give him everything, with gratitude. Yahuwah loves a cheerful giver. We give with gratitude, not out of being coerced, not out of being compelled, but because of our love for him and gratitude to him. And I think that stands true throughout scripture. Praise Yah. Sister Diane, and then Wences.
Shalom. And in terms of that verse 29, I think it's very appropriate when you go and look at the definition of thigh. The name is Yarek, and it can mean thigh, side, loin, or the base, which it could very well represent, what you guys were saying. And the question would be, well, why? Why this organ? Because when you say the loins, this is what you're speaking of, and this word represents the loins, the side, as well as the thigh. So why? When you look at the fact that, well, this is life, right? This is life. This represents life. It represents the covenant. The man is the head. So whenever they're making a covenant, it's almost like you can say this is a life situation. This is a serious matter. So how much better to represent the symbolism, of what this means. I mean, it may seem odd, but we don't think like they were thinking back in that day. If you just look at it like that this is life. This is the covenant, and that's what this covenant was all about. It's a serious matter. It's a legal thing, even. And I wanted to look at verse 22 now. You all know that I've kind of jumped on board with Brother Rick and this Olive Tav moment. I see several Olive Tav moments in 22. I don't know if Brother Rick is there, but maybe he could help me out in the explanation of it. But there's one there, reading 22. Only the land of the priests brought he not, for the priests had a portion assigned them of Pharaoh, and did eat out of their portion with Pharaoh, which Pharaoh gave them. So if this is an Alatah moment, then this is very much still in the covenant of Yah. And the way that I can interpret this, just looking at it from off the top, is that Yah is in everything. You know, he's in everything, and he somehow affected. You know, he's sovereign, he's everywhere, and it even went over to Pharaoh per se. It was because of Yah that the food was even available, you know, for the priests to even eat, you know, with Pharaoh. You know, if it were not for Yahuah, then the food would not even be there. And then it says, eat their portion with Pharaoh, gave them, wherefore they sold not Alatah their lands. So it wasn't meant, and I really hate to use that, maybe someone can help me out with this. It really wasn't meant for them to sell their land. So once again, Yahuah was in on that. You see what I'm saying? Am I making sense?
Yeah, I cross-referenced that verse, and it led me to Ezra 7:24, and it says, also we inform you that it shall not be lawful to impose tax, tribute, or custom on any of the priests, Levites, singers, gatekeepers, Nethinim, or servants of the house of Elohim. So
this,
I mean, I think there's definitely a distinction between the priests here and the Levitical priests, but it's interesting that that passage was footnoted to that particular verse. But definitely something carved out, set apart, that they would not touch the land of the priest,
right,
for sure.
he had his hand in on it. Amen.
All right, so Wences, and that'll end it because we're up on time. You there, brother?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. Definitely just shorter points than before. Definitely in regards to the fifth, I think it was the fifth that was designated. When we look at the context, I'm sure there's definitely a spiritual application to it, but the immediate context, look what it says in verse 24, and it shall come to pass in the increase that ye shall give the fifth part unto Pharaoh. And 4 parts shall be your own for seed of the field, and for your food, and for them of your household, and for food for your little ones. And they said, thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. So the practicality of the designating the fifth part is that it says, and it shall come to pass in the increase. They're just experiencing a famine. And they basically saw that Joseph's strategy, because he was filled with the spirit of Yah, to give him that ability of administration to the Pharaoh and to everyone else, said, hey, he saved us for 7 years.
Right.
This system works.
Yeah.
So because the system worked, it became law, which is why it says, and it shall come to pass in the increase. And then they saw that it was fair enough that, hey, if it worked, it's going to continue working, and we won't have to experience this circumstance anymore. How is that practical to us individually? Many of us may not be good stewards financially. So this is a good financial advice for us to take in our own lives and with our own finances. Another thing in regards to, let me see here. Joseph made a law. Now notice what's very interesting. In verse 27, before that, in the early chapters, the early verses of the chapter, they were calling Israel. They didn't call him Israel. They called him what? Jacob.
Jacob, yeah.
But yet in verse 27, all of a sudden, what happens? They call him Israel. And then look what happens. It says, but I will lie, he says in verse 29, and the time drew nigh that Israel must die. And he called his son Joseph and said unto him, if now I have found grace in thy sight, but I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh, and deal kindly and truly with me. Bury me not, I pray thee, in Egypt, but I will lie with my fathers, and thou shalt carry me out of Egypt. Amen. And bury me in their burying place. And he said, I will do as thou hast said. And he said, swear unto me. And he sware unto him. And Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head. Now, what's interesting about that is that, again, he goes from Jacob in the early chapter, and then he goes to the name Israel, representing all 12 tribes, representing the covenant promise that, guess what? He was gonna dwell in the land. Guess what, everyone? That promise will be fulfilled in us. Revelation, it says, blessed are the dead, blessed are they that die from henceforth, for their works do follow them. So the works that Abraham had, the works that Jacob had, is the same works that Joseph, because Joseph believed that. He appropriated, and dead men's bones speak. Because Joseph and his bones, what did they do with his bones? They buried them where? Left them in Egypt? So through Joseph coming into the promised land and being buried in the promised land, it was by faith holding on to that covenant promise that Yah gave him, that all of us, we will walk in the promised land. Israel will be restored here on earth. Yah's covenant will be fulfilled. And
Praise
that's
Yah.
what we have to believe.
Praise Yah, brother. I think, throughout those, after he gave him the name Israel, he definitely used that name interchangeably, specifically speaking when he was talking to him in reference to him obeying him, and then Jacob when he was in a fleshly mindset. But here he brings them together, and I think, yes, absolutely, verse 27, Israel, speaking of the children of Israel as a whole, and then he says in verse 28, and Jacob. So I think those two are separate. That's the first time it's used as a nation versus a person. So good point, brother. Very good point. All right. This will conclude our Genesis chapter 47 study. Next week, Genesis chapter 48. Praise Yah. Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom, Akuti, and Brohim. Thank you so much for viewing this video. We hope it was helpful to your walk in the truth. Remember to always search the scriptures on your own, to study Abba's word and show yourself approved, according to 2 Timothy 2:15. We invite you to study with us. To join us in a live study, just go to our website at assemblyofyahuah.com and click the Join Us tab. We have something available Wednesday through Saturday of every week. If you've been Baruch or blessed by this video today or any other study, we encourage you to go to the Giving tab on our website. Our elders all have their own ways of income, so none of the giving or proceeds go to them. Instead, it goes to biblical assembly needs. We also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you don't miss any new videos. We sincerely pray that Abba continues to direct your path as you acknowledge Him in all your ways. Much avaha, and again, shalom.